Hello. Hi, this is Marc Sabatella from Outside Shore Music, and there we go. Little music. So, thanks everyone being here. This is Marc Sabatella from Outside Shore Music, and this is the Music Masterclass, and at some point MuseScore will finish waking up. How's everyone doing today? We're going to be looking at Counterpoint. We're going to be talking about some of the exercises we've been doing and looking at how to go about doing them, what kind of the conventions are here, and that's what we're going to be doing today. So I'm making sure things are okay, and obviously MuseScore is taking its time waking up. Don't worry about that. Big snowstorm here that we just had, and so I was a little late getting started here, but we should be fine. So, yeah, what I'm going to do is I'm going to first make sure that we all understand what we're doing here and see what kind of questions people have, and then we'll take a look at some of the music because a bunch of you have already submitted your first species counterpoint lessons. So we'll talk about first species, we'll talk about second and third a little bit because people are getting into that, and then next week we'll talk more about fourth and fifth species and what we're going to do with that. Right? So we're going to spend a few weeks just on two voice counterpoint because there's really a lot to unpack here. Right now we're just dealing with these kind of simple exercises to establish some groundwork. So what I'm going to be doing here is first things first, questions, ask. If you got questions, ask here in the chat, and I'm happy to do my best to answer questions about the subject matter. The other thing that I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be looking at your pieces, and if I look at your piece and then you have a specific question, because I'm going to try to address questions that people asked when they posted them, if I didn't already respond to them, and then I'm going to maybe do a little bit of a demonstration here if there's time. And so Catherine's asking how to submit the exercise. So let me go ahead and show you where we're going to be doing this. I'm going to flip over. Let me do it this way. Give me one moment. I'm going to just do a little housekeeping here. I'm going to open this in a separate window. And then over here, I'm going to open the community in a window, and I'll show you how to do this. So what you're going to do is you're going to go to the musicianship workshop space, which is, if you looked at the tour of the course at the beginning, you'll see that the course itself is here in Practical Counterpoint, but the musicianship workshop space is where all the projects and everything are. And so that is where you will learn what the projects are, and it is where you will actually post them. So at the top, if you're in the musicianship workshop space, you'll see this lovely link here that says how to share your music. Click that link. Sorry, it's still waking up here. How to share your music. Click that link and it will go through step by step on how to post. If you're doing it in MuseScore, how to post it to MuseScore.com and then post the link in here. If you're not doing it in MuseScore, if you're writing it out, well then you can just take a picture of it and just attach it. Okay, so those are your two main options. You either post to MuseScore.com and then paste a link into a comment or a post here, or you can just take a picture of it. If you can do the picture in a way, if your camera has like an app that will scan it and turn it into PDF, or if you can otherwise get a PDF instead of a photograph, it'll be a little easier to work with, but it will be fine either way. So this here, the workshop space, is where all the action for this course takes place. And so the place that I'm talking about is right here, exercise first species. And so what I'm having people do is post as comments in here, and if you post a link to MuseScore.com, it shows up like this, and that's what we're going to be looking at in a second. And if you attach a PDF or a photograph, it'll also show that. So lots of different ways of getting your stuff here. So let's go ahead and jump into this. So we're going to be dealing mostly with first species counterpoint here, and So what I'm going to do is just look at some of these examples. And so hopefully if you've gone through the lessons far enough to know what first species counterpoint is, great. That's my hope. If not, and if you're just visiting here, checking out what we're doing, first species counterpoint is what's called one-to-one counterpoint, where there's a given melody, which is this one here on the bottom, and you're supposed to harmonize it by choosing a different note over every original note there. You're supposed to choose your own harmony note there based on principles that have to do with what intervals sound good, which ones create dissonance, how you're going to resolve that dissonance, and so forth. So in so-called first species counterpoint, where there's one note, one harmony note against one melody note, if we're trying to do this in Renaissance style, there's a very simple rule here. Every note has to be consonant. No dissonances are allowed in this type of writing. Now, that is a very broad statement, and it doesn't mean you can never have dissonances in your music. No, it means when we're doing this specific thing, writing one note against one note, and they're whole notes, and you're trying to make it sound like Renaissance music, we're going to want no dissonances, all right? So I'm going to first go through the exercise here that Shelley has done and just look at it from that perspective. So I was, give me a moment here because I was going to get my other computer going here to monitor the proceedings. And again, got a bit delayed by the weather. So just want to make sure that everything is okay as far as you seeing and hearing and all. So give me a moment. All right, so I'm just going to play through this example. So that is the exercise as Shelley has done it here. It sounds really nice to me. There's only one spot that I think I'm going to comment upon as a place where you want to think about. And actually, I'll ask you all, what do you notice about this piece as I just played it here that whether you notice it by hearing it or whether you notice by looking at it that you think might be comment worthy? I am going to make an observation about that difference between seeing it and hearing it. I'm going to tell you that the thing that I see, I don't really hear. There's a thing I'm going to comment about that I can see. I can see it right here, that there's a thing going on that maybe you want to think twice about. But when I listened to it, it didn't bother me. And I want someone, hopefully, to be able to tell me what that is before I tell you. So the chat always takes a few seconds to catch up. So, Jesus, Priceless Treasure. I don't know that one, but are you talking about the melody here? That the counterpoint? Because remember, the original melody is this one. So that melody is a really nice melody. I'm going to play it one more time. So Sora is asking, why did she double the measure at the end? And I feel like that was just to make it feel a little more final. And that's a good call. I mean, typically a lot of these pieces might be in a time signature like 4/2 instead of 4/4 in the Renaissance, and they would have whole notes and half notes throughout, and then they would end with a breve, a double whole note. So that's a fine choice. Now, Allison is pointing out the octave Fs here, and so the thing is, the octave Fs are, I mean, I don't love using octaves, but the rules, as it were, of species counterpoint don't forbid the use of octaves. They just sort of discourage overuse of them, right? And you'll see, all sorts of places where using an octave can be fine. One of the things that we talk about when we're going to use a perfect interval is approach it in contrary motion, at least. And she does that. So it's not my favorite aspect of the piece, but it's fine. And the contrary motion is nice. Jimmy, if you heard the perfect fourth, I'm happy. I'm really happy because I don't hear that. But you're absolutely right. The very next chord after the octave F was this perfect fourth, A to D. Now, the thing is, and Steinhart's pointing that out as well, I don't hear that as dissonant. I think most people in the 21st century or the 20th or the 19th or even the 18th don't hear perfect fourths as inherently dissonant. So in the lesson where I talk about consonant and dissonances, I talk about reasons why the perfect fourth is special and why, and we're going to talk about that again when we get into three-part counterpoint, because what we're going to learn is that perfect fourths are absolutely fine in upper voices. They're less fine in lower voices. So for instance, if I play a full D minor chord here with the root doubled, there's going to be a perfect fourth on top of it. Or for that matter, if I just play a first inversion triad, there's going to be a fourth on top. So the fourth isn't really inherently dissonant, and yet in two-part counterpoint, we typically try to avoid the fourth or treat it as if it were dissonant, because this is the sound to modern ears that we expect. We think we're hearing a second inversion triad that we then expect. So we think this is 1-6-4 going to 5, going to 1. Or we think it's something like this. A suspension. When we hear fourths without additional context, our ear starts to fill in either a second inversion triad or a suspension, either of which has a strong resolution tendency. So when we're writing two-voice counterpoint, and especially if we're going to sit on it for like a whole measure like this, we typically avoid that fourth. And yet, when you listen to it, it doesn't sound bad, especially because we just heard those Fs. And I'll tell you what my brain is doing, and you can ask yourself the same question. My brain is hearing those two measures together as a first inversion D minor triad. My brain is still hearing the F resonating in my ear, and so when I play this octave followed by those notes there, my brain is interpreting that whole thing as a D minor triad, and the A wasn't really the bottom note of it. The F was. So I think this is as good an example as I could ever have concocted of the principle that says context is everything. Context is everything. You can't just say fourths are dissonant, right? There's a lot more going on than that. Nor can you just say fourths are always okay, right? It's just something to pay attention to. So, and yeah, so the question from Paul, sorry, I hadn't gotten to that yet because I was really focused on the fourth. In the context of these exercises, we're treating these as complete pieces. And yes, the convention in both the Renaissance and early Baroque is that we start with octaves or fifths. Now, in reality, when we start applying these techniques to other music, we're going to apply first species counterpoint techniques to individual phrases in the middle of a piece, and then it doesn't necessarily need to start with a fifth or an octave. It's more a convention to make this feel like a completed piece, but it's not like something you have to do when you're using it in another context. All right, so I'm now going to play, because now she did another version where the cantus firmus, the original melody, was on top, and she wrote her melody below it. And she wrote a very different melody below it than the melody she wrote above it before, which is great. So I'm going to try it. So right off the bat, it starts with a fourth. So here's the thing. I made this point in a video that I'm going to post next week when I do a fifth species example. Getting to Paul's point here about starting with an octave or a fifth, the way I would really put that is we want to start the piece with scale degrees 1 or 5 only. So if it starts with D on top, putting a G below it, well, that's scale degree 4. And I'm using kind of modern terminology. There would be better ways of wording it if we're trying to live within Renaissance terminology. But if we're writing a piece that's meant to have D as a final, we're not going to start it with this perfect fifth. We will only start it with that perfect fifth, right? Only the perfect fifth between scale degrees 1 and 5. Because that is the foundation of this piece. We're going to start it on scale degrees 1 and 5. So Shelley is doing that, starting on scale degrees 1 and 5, but again, doing it in a way where there's a perfect fourth. And here, I'm less happy with it. I was actually totally fine with that fourth in the middle there, because for the reasons I mentioned, my ears filled in what it needed to fill in, didn't bother me. But this one bothers me a little more. But that's, that is just a thing. So going on. Whoops. All right. So there are some really nice things going on here and some great things that I can, sort of talk about as far as things to be aware of. So let's ignore the starting. I'm going to maybe, instead of starting on that A, if we had started on a D and then gone to the F after it, we would have parallel octaves. So that wasn't a great choice. And I think that's kind of where Shelley's mind is, trying to avoid that parallel octaves. If we had started on the unison and then moved in contrary motion to that octave, does that get you off the hook? Going from a unison to an octave? Some would say, yeah, that works, and some would say no. So probably you're going to have to just start with a D below that D and not go to an F on the next note and find another choice. And Sora, as far as the dissonance, so I'm going to come back to that on the B to the F, but I'm going to go through in order here, but you're right to point that out. The next thing she has going on that's interesting is this. She has a G under the E and then another G under the D. Repeated notes in this style are a thing. But they're like one of those things like perfect intervals that you maybe don't do a whole lot of. And it didn't particularly bother me that repeated note was there. It was noteworthy, but not necessarily bothersome. The obvious alternative would have been that. But then it would have been more just parallel motion. Parallel motion is fine. It's pretty. And the original version she has, just like my demo, has parallel motion. Parallel motion is beautiful. It's pretty. But one of the principles, if you're trying to really get this counterpoint aspect of it, if you're trying to make these lines sound independent, you want to not fall back on that parallel motion too much. Treat it like sugar. And you're not going to, we most of us love sugar. Maybe not just spoonfuls of it, but, sweet things, dessert, stuff that's got sugar in it, using sugar to improve something. We do this, but in moderation, right? And it's like something that you do that really brightens things up, but you got to have the rest of the stuff too, right? So think of parallel thirds or parallel sixths, like these are parallel thirds here. If she had gone to the F there, that would be parallel sixth. Think of that as being like sugar. Yes, we love it. Do it sometimes. But be careful how much we do it. All right? So I was perfectly happy that she didn't do it there. And that would have also repeated that F. It would have made that counterpoint line come right back to the F, which I feel would have been also maybe not so strong. So moving ahead, consonants, consonants, consonants. And here's some nice parallel motion. But then is the note that Sora is asking about, the F against the B. No, this is a tritone, and this the ear should hear very clearly as dissonant. And the point that I'm going to make about dissonance here is, again, context is everything. Even in the Renaissance. Sugar for diabetics. That's but parallel thirds are definitely a thing. You'll definitely see in the Renaissance. There's even a name for it. What is it? Bourdon? I don't remember. There's it's used as a spice. throughout, but it becomes much bigger in the Renaissance, in the Baroque, when it becomes all these flowery parallel third passages. But so when I say context is everything, if we are writing whole notes like this, then putting a dissonance there would not be so good. However, first species counterpoint doesn't always mean whole notes. It could mean quarter note against quarter note, or eighth note against eighth note, right? Or whatever. And if this passage had been faster, that might have been perfectly fine at that kind of tempo. Having that dissonance that then resolves could be perfectly acceptable. So you have to take that into consideration. So in these species counterpoint exercises, we're assuming a slow-moving melody, and therefore we won't create a dissonance against it that's that prominent. But as any of the examples that I showed should make clear, it's not uncommon to have dissonances in a first species type of context, a one against one context, if it's brief enough. Now, there is a common solution to that problem that you will often see in Dorian mode. So this piece, being like all white keys starting on D, is Dorian mode. The solution is to put a B flat down there. So if we used a B flat there, it would give us a perfect fifth instead of a tritone. And you will see composers in the Renaissance using B flat for exactly that reason. You might have a piece that's otherwise Dorian, it's otherwise all naturals, with D as a final, and you'll see a B flat used specifically to avoid that tritone with the F. However, in this context, if we look at the melody, it's a little bit awkward to try to solve it with a B flat, because we're having to go directly from B to B flat, which could be okay. But then we're having to go from B flat to C sharp. That is an augmented second, and that's just a little bit awkward melodically. You're not going to see that in the Renaissance. Again, you will see it more in Baroque or later music, especially instrumental music. So a B flat should be on the table as something to consider if you kind of feel like you want a note in the B area, but the B natural is giving you that tritone. You could try a B flat. The more common place to find the B flat is not sandwiched between B and C sharp, but sandwiched before and after an A. So if the line had been something like, right? If it had been an A before and after it, that idea. In fact, there's a Latin term for it, una nota supra la. It's a note above la, a note above A, basically. So, and Shelley, you're absolutely right. As soon as you do that B flat to C sharp, that's where the harmonic minor scale comes from. That's exactly where it comes from. Is this idea of having a leading tone directly after that flatted note from Dorian, or in Aeolian, if we're in A, that F is already there, and then as soon as we add a leading tone, we get a G sharp. So that harmonic minor sound has that augmented second in it, and what you'll see is, like in the concept of harmonic minor as a scale is a more modern invention. It wouldn't have been known it wouldn't have been used in that term in Fuchs's day, I don't think. Someone, I don't remember if it was Paul or someone else, asked, when did composers start thinking in terms of chords? And that's a good question that I don't have the best answer to, and I would love it if someone here has some good historical insight into that. It's around, 1600-ish, give or take 100 years, right? The theory of chords goes back longer, but people weren't necessarily thinking in terms of chords until you get a little deeper into the Baroque, but some composers would be thinking about them sometime. It's not like one day everyone woke up and said, oh, we're going to think about chords now. But if I had to say about when did it happen, 1600-ish. So, but that leading tone we definitely want there. And then ending on unison is fine. Now, Shelley has done all sorts of other exercises here, but I am going to move on and look at some other people's. But I do want to come back because she's one of the people who has done a second species one. And I am going to try to come back if we have time and look at a second species one. So next I'm going to look at Kevin's. And Kevin has also done a couple of these. And I'm going to go ahead and, since he chose different ones, that's great. I'm going to choose the one on F. And we'll start with the one where the cantus firmus was the lower line. So the cantus firmus was this. And so he has written his line above it. Now, when you're writing a piece where the final is F, these B flats then become not necessarily required, but very commonly used. Right? Very, very commonly used. And Monteverdi was definitely one of the people who kind of pointed the way there. So you're absolutely right about that. So the thing is that we have this concept of Lydian mode, and everything about how we name modes has like changed many times over the years, and the way that people think about the modes, the way they name the modes. So it's really hard to address that fully, and I'm not the scholar to do it. But I will tell you that the idea of Lydian mode as a scale that has both, that starts and ends on F and has a B natural, yes, that has been a scale in existence for a long time, but when composers work in that mode, you'll see them often using B flats, because it avoids that sense of that tritone against the final. So if you find the B in close proximity to that F, you'll find it flatted. And so what I had said was just go ahead and flat the Fs. Fuchs in all his examples flats the B. He almost every time in all of his examples that have the final as F, you'll see him flatting the Bs. All right, so I'm going to play through Kevin's example here. All right, I like it. So Kevin had made the observation that to create a counterline that doesn't sound random is not as easy as you might think. And yeah, that's absolutely true. Someone else also asked about this. To what extent should we be thinking about the melody or versus the harmony? Well, you got to think about the melody you're creating. You absolutely have to think about that melody. You just gotta. So otherwise, you're just creating harmony. You're not creating counterpoint. Counterpoint is going to be all about each individual part being inherently interesting. And so Kevin says it's hard to create one, but I think he did a fabulous job. And I want to point out a couple of places where it feels like that was especially true. Allison's point about Bach moving away from counterpoint. I mean, obviously, Bach used counterpoint heavily, but he very clearly was thinking harmonically. The transition, he wasn't the first there. And so if he's writing, around 1700, I want to say that the music that informed him had been going on for some time there. But yeah, chorales are clearly primarily harmonic devices, harmonic explorations rather than contrapuntal ones. So let's talk about this melody that Kevin's written. Kevin, you're asking if ending on the high note is okay? It's fine with me. I don't have... So the thing is, these exercises, we don't know who we're writing for, if these are meant for voices or if it's meant for two flutes or whatever, but there's absolutely no issue as far as I'm concerned. There is the distinction between what are called the authentic modes or the standard modes and the plagal modes, and that has to do with whether the final is the highest note of the melody or whether it's the final but the range, the ambitus, expands above and below it, and so those are called the plagal modes, and so there's all this theory that goes around with this, and then at some point you just kind of get past that and realize if you're writing for instruments, people can play more than an octave anyhow. So that's my observation about that. So I played that melody pretty quickly there because I want to point out something about that melody. I'm going to play it faster still, just the melody. Well, that's a great melody, right? It's a little repetitive. but it's repetitive in a charming way, right? And when I say repetitive, it's B flat C A, B flat C A, and if you look at it at that, if you look at it at that level, just B flat C A twice, you might say, well, gee, it's kind of repetitive, but actually, it's metrically different. When I play it faster, imagine these as quarter notes, or as even eighth notes. 1 and 2 and 1 and 2. The first B flat is on the and. The second B flat is on the B. So metrically, even when you slow it down, it's still the case that this is in an odd position, that's in an even position. And so it creates a yin-yang relationship. I don't know if that's really the right use of that term, but hopefully you know what I'm getting at here. There's a repetition, but a difference there. So, so we hear that twice, but at a different metric relationship, also with different harmony notes underneath it. And what really cemented that was the fact that you repeated that A there, because you notice how when I play that, I went 1 and 2 and 1 and 2, and then the fact that you've got the repeated A helps that feel like it's the conclusion of that phrase. So whether you were playing it fast enough for you to be aware of that or not, to me, that makes this feel extremely logical in that way. Then at the end, you're just like, oh, I got to get to the end. And if it was eighth notes, probably we would have found some other way to draw that out a little bit more to make that final F show up on the beat instead of off the beat or whatever. But yeah, no, I think that was just a really good job. And when I look at this now in terms of the intervals, I didn't notice any dissonances. There is an awful lot of parallel motion, but not like in a bad way at the beginning, right? We have that's parallel motion, then is also parallel motion, but then it resolves with contrary motion. And again, the fact that we heard that same melody but with different, or I shouldn't say melody, the same upper voice but with a different actual melody in the cantus firmus helps make that seem that much more interesting. And then there's contrary motion like lots of other places, so nice choices. Now, in his other version here, he also has not used the exact same melody underneath, which is great because it makes you think twice. In the demonstration that I'm going to post next week, you'll see me composing one designed to be invertible, meaning I can write one counterpoint and use it either above or below. And so I show that in the demonstration I'll post next week. But I want to make sure everyone goes through the first 4 species before you start tackling that. So here's his version where the cantus firmus is the top voice. Nice, beautiful. And again, I'm starting to play these faster, not to save time, but because to emphasize the actual melodicism of this, right? That original line here on the top, that also is like nursery rhyme simple. That was the original cantus firmus. Isn't it that? Someone who's Scottish can tell me what that song is, because I can't quite can't quite bring it to mind, but it is essentially. Or are you talking about the bottom part? Well, yeah, you're going to find snippets of recognizable melodies no matter how you do this. So he's got sixths, he's got thirds, he's got some parallel motion, he's got some contrary motion. He does have this one perfect fifth here. And notice what that perfect fifth does. It resolves in this particular way. This is the way anyone who grew up after 1700, I think, is going to hear that. That perfect fifth, we're going to hear as a 5 chord going to 1. I mean, we're not always going to hear it as a 5 chord, but we're certainly going to hear it as a triad. And by following it with this D and F, we are hinting at 5-1 in D minor. So there's a little hint of a 5-1 cadence in here. Invertible counterpoint, double counterpoint. Yes, I believe that those terms are synonymous. I learned it as invertible, but I do remember seeing books also use the term double. There's another meaning, though, for double counterpoint that can mean something different involving actual multiple pairs of counterpoint. But I'm pretty sure when you, Allison, when you're talking about double counterpoint, you actually mean the exact same thing that I mean when I say invertible, like crotchet, quarter note, just different terminology. So I'm going to move on and take a look at another example, but nice job on that one there. So here is Mark Edelstein's version, and he's got a few different versions here, and I'm going to go ahead and take a look at the one with the final of E, because this, I want everyone to hear the sound of the so-called Phrygian cadence that's going to result here. This is the one mode in which we don't try to create a leading tone. Someone, was it Shelley? See, I see all the comments and I look at them and think, oh, I'm going to get to that. Someone had asked about using the leading tone. And yes, in Dorian, you're going to raise that C to C sharp. Aeolian, you're going to raise that G to G sharp as you approach the cadence. In Mixolydian, when G is your final, you'll raise the F to F sharp. But in Phrygian, where E is your final, we typically don't raise that leading tone, and it creates a very distinctive sound that I want you to pay attention to when we get there. So here, the cantus firmus is the bottom voice, and the counterpoint was added on top. Let's hear it. There you go. So this line here, and in particular that sound, is the so-called Phrygian cadence. It has a whole step approach up to the final and a half step approach down, which is opposite from every other cadence. In C, you're going to have a half step going up, whole step going down. Same in G if you do a leading tone. Same in D if you use the leading tone. You're always going to, and same in A if you use a leading tone. Same in F, and you don't have to modify anything. That idea of half step leading up, whole step coming down is the way all these other modes work. Phrygian is the backwards one. And so it has whole step going up, half step coming down. There is an aspect to that sound that in many people's ears who grew up after the Renaissance, which I think includes everyone here, we associate this sound with the following. It's basically the sound of 4 to 5, and then it's assuming it's going to 1. This sounds like a half cadence to modern ears. And it is actually used kind of that way in the Renaissance as well. It would typically be followed by something, I shouldn't say typically, often, sometimes more often than mere chance. It would be followed by something that actually does suggest an A. But not to the extent that our ears might expect an A to follow that. So, in this example here, Mark Scott, his line is the top line, and so he has chosen to repeat that E, which I think is fine. And now he's coming to this perfect fifth, which is fine, and he's coming into it by contrary motion, nothing wrong with that. And then I really like that leap up. Now, this leap down, boo, bum, bum, that is dramatic, right? Drama, good. I have nothing against drama. Love drama. But that's one of the things you ask yourself. Do I want that kind of drama? Big leap up, big leap down. one of the principles about leaps in voice leading in general is if you're going to have multiple leaps in a row, whether it's in the same direction or in opposite direction, is to try to outline a triad. It makes it easier to sing, easier for the ear to kind of comprehend the line. Well, this isn't outlining the full triad, but it's consistent with a triad, right? It could be a C major triad. So as far as that goes, it's dramatic. And of course, it's doubly dramatic because it's coming after, it's coming along with the cantus firmus also having an octave leap, which is, that's unusual. I will say, though, that doing this, there's something about it that's, because it's contrary motion, I don't hear it as repetitive. But if we change it from, if we just ignore the octave leap, it really is repeating the same two notes. So yes, it's dramatic, but also there's something repetitive about it. And I'm not bothered by it, but that's one of the things I say. Ask yourself the question. Notice these things. Ask yourself that question. Is there something about the repetition that bothers you? And it might be all about the context, might be about the lyrics, might be about other voices happening, might be about where in the piece it is. Now, so Kevin's asking a very valid question. And yes, for the purpose of teaching exercises, they often say don't do leaps larger than a fourth. Now, fifth, you got to have leaps of a fifth. Fifth are going to be fine. But, I mean, it's you don't have to look very hard to find examples of larger leaps. And so we could make a rule or a guideline that says, yeah, probably don't do too many larger leaps. But there it is right there in the cantus firmus. If the cantus firmus has got the leap, already we've got some permission for there to be octave leaps because it's right there in the cantus firmus. Now, he didn't have to exacerbate it by creating another octave leap against it, but it just goes to show that octave leaps are okay. The thing that you will hear is no dissonant leaps larger than a fourth. That is the typical thing. A fourth is a dissonant interval in the right or the wrong context. So the general rule you'll hear is don't use a dissonant leap larger than a fourth. Well, what does that really mean? Fifths are consonant, but tritones are dissonant. So it does say don't use a tritone leap. Sixths, whether it's a major or a minor sixth, that's consonant. Sevenths are dissonant, whether major or minor. So maybe don't leap by sevenths. So really, if you hear someone say don't use a dissonant leap larger than a fourth, what they're really saying is no tritones or no sevenths. And here, again, this is a Baroqueism, and it's a Baroqueism and also a vocal musicism, because you do not have to look very hard to find examples of leaps of a seventh it's a Renaissanceism. Did I say? Yeah, Renaissanceism and a vocalism. In Baroque music, leaps of a seventh are super common. That's a really common type of lick. You could say is just an alias for, it's like an octave displacement within a line, and I mentioned that in one of the lessons. But so yeah, it's a thing you think about. When I say it's dramatic, I mean so you don't do that often, but once in the piece, I'm good with. So yeah, I like that example a lot. I'm going to play through his other example with the cantus firmus, was the top line, just to hear what his thing sounds like. Haha. So, I'm going to come back to this part in the middle where I said aha in a moment. This Phrygian cadence, in my relatively limited experience, the Phrygian cadence is one of the ones that's more typically found in that order, where the ascending line is above the descending line. There's something about it in this order that has a very different feel to it. It doesn't as much remind me of that. It doesn't remind me as much of that sound, that half cadence sound, but you'll nothing. I mean, if that's how you have to write this. If the cantus firmus is on top and it does go from F to E, then you're gonna pair it with a D to E below. But I will just say, in my limited experience, that's not actually as common. You won't find the cantus firmus doing the descent like that above. You won't find an upper voice doing that while the lower voice supplying the ascent as often. If I'm wrong, someone tell me. So let's come back to this little passage here. C against A, and then reversed. C against A. And then another C against A. All right, now I am going to call that one out. I said that over here, this kind of really didn't bother me at all, the fact that it was essentially the same two notes repeated. The octave leap made it interesting and dramatic, but merely exchanging the two voices, that doesn't, the ear isn't going to realize that happened. It's still just going to hear that as repeated. And then follow that up with the same two notes again. I feel like that's probably a little too static in here. Again, if that's the effect you're going for, you want it to harmonically kind of slow down at that passage. If these weren't whole notes, if these were quarter notes and you needed it to be 3 beats of the same chord and it was another voice filling in the E or whatever else to complete the chord, that could be totally fine. And Jimmy, yes, you're right that the voices are crossing here. Voice crossing is a thing you learn in 4-part harmony to probably not do very often, except when you need to. And the same is going to be true in counterpoint. If you're going to be writing for 2 voices with a similar range, they are going to cross. Like I was just last night looking for examples of like recorder duets that I could use as examples. And I really wanted them to be just 2 voice recorder duets for like a soprano recorder and an alto recorder, and where they wouldn't cross at all. But the reality is, almost every single duet I found had the voices crossing at some point. And that's going to happen in vocal music as well. There's not a great reason why it should have to. If we're talking about a high voice and a low voice, you shouldn't need to cross them. But if you're writing for 2 high voices or 2 low voices, you can totally expect that they're going to cross somewhere. So yeah, voice crossing is one of those things that I wouldn't necessarily just rule it out of hand. But here we are crossing and repeating. So if it had been crossing like this, that would be maybe a different story. That would be like that, that would be like, oh, that would be fine. It's not the crossing that I'm questioning as much as it is the repetition. Now, at some point, I'm going to do a whole unit, not in the counterpoint course, talking about jazz voicings and big band voicings, in particular saxophone section voicings, and we'll learn about that as a technique to avoid repeated notes. Because if your harmonization really requires the notes to be repeated, this is a useful digression. If you're writing a part for 2 wind instruments and it's like eighth notes, and the way your voice leading works, you kind of need to have the same 2 notes in a row in 2 voices. This isn't going to be very good. As a wind player, a woodwind in particular, you want to slur most of these eighth note lines. 2, 2, as opposed to 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, or ta, 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 ta. So you want to tongue once and then slur. But as soon as there's a repeated note, you need to use your tongue. 2, 2, 2. If you're going to have to repeat a note, you're going to need to use your tongue. So one way to avoid repeated notes in woodwind and brass, I should say, wind instruments, one way to avoid repeated notes is to use that what's called voice exchange, doing exactly that. Instead of repeating the notes, swap out their voices. So it is a time-honored tradition used in certain contexts. All right. Excellent. I'm just loving the stuff that we're seeing here. Going to move on because there are other examples posted, and I'm kind of hitting things up in the order that they occur in here. Bob has gone in and put in numbers here, but then he also kind of mentioned that I think think he mentioned that his numbers might not necessarily be accurate because he might have changed them after. So I'm going to go ahead and take one of his here, and I think final F use B flat. I'm just looking to see which one I want to use. I haven't used a G one yet, so I'm going to use a G. There we go. And yes, there will be an orchestration class in which I get to talk about things like that. We haven't looked at a G one yet. And so for G, what we'll see is, yes, G, the mode starting and ending with G is called Mixolydian. And what it means in practice is it's still going to be all those white notes, but when we get to the cadence, we want an F sharp. If you have Fs somewhere else in your counterpoint, maybe you'd use the F, maybe use the F sharp. Think of it as like how minor keys, in a minor key, in the key of A minor, you don't always use G sharp. It's not like, oh, this piece is in A harmonic minor, I have to always sharp my G. No, you use it when you need it because it completes the harmony correctly, and it's the leading tone going into the tonic. But there might be other contexts within that same piece, within the same phrase even, where you use G natural. It's the same with F versus F sharp in Mixolydian. You can use them both. So I'm going to play through this example now. All right, so this is really nice. It's very nice consonant. What are the C's and the P? Oh, contrary and parallel. Excellent, excellent. Love it. So he's got a lot of contrary motion going in here. So I like this line a lot. There's one aspect of this line that is rather unique, I think, and so I'm going to be looking at that shortly. But I want to see if anyone else catches the same kind of unique aspect of this line. It's very curious to me that it worked out this way, and it's neither good nor bad. It's just a unique quality of this line that was very striking to me. So, anything in particular about this line? So first of all, detail-wise, here's that same thing of B against G, and now G against B. So it's the same two notes, but now there's the contrary motion, the voice exchange. So this one doesn't feel like this. Even though it's kind of the same thing, the difference in octaves makes, and the difference in the intervals, it was a sixth, and now it's a third. That makes this one feel less repetitive, even though at some level it's the same thing going on. So Sora is using the word chordal, and I think you're getting at the same thing that I'm going to see. The melody itself, this is the cantus firmus was the lower line. What Bob has written is the upper line. But look at this line. It's very, skips, exactly. It's very arpeggiated. And then a couple of steps. And now check this out. So this is, it's a unique aspect of this line, and I would say that if these were meant to be whole notes, if these are really going to be whole notes, and you're trying to write in a Renaissance style, that's going to feel a little off, as skippy as that is. And yet, imagine these as 16th notes in a Bach piece. And Allison, yes, I'm sure you're absolutely right about the C, E, C kind of thing. I remember noticing that too. I don't remember where, but I'm sure it's in there somewhere. Or it's G, G. Maybe it's this one you're talking about. But check this out. I'm gonna try my best to play that thing like in 16th notes. No, I can't play it that fast. Yeah. I could totally imagine that. Right? That type of arpeggiated line that's all over the place, right? One of the things, we had talked about the C major Bach invention, which is one of the less I was going to talk about this if I have time, but I'm not going to today. I'll get to it later. But the A minor invention, I I'm just going to take a brief look at it here. Invention A minor. The A minor invention from the same collection is very oh, really? A flat? Okay, this is a terrible one. Right, so it's very arpeggiated. Arpeggiated melodies are super common in the Baroque instrumental tradition. So and this is not one against one counterpoint, it's two against one counterpoint, right? There's two notes in one voice against one in the other. And but the idea that the melody is basically arpeggiated and highly arpeggiated, not uncommon at all if we're talking about a faster moving melody in the Baroque. So it was interesting to me that it kind of worked out that way, because otherwise I would have said, oh, that's too many leaps and they're not outlining a triad, but they are outlining a triad. It's just a lot of them. So at this tempo in a Renaissance style, I'd maybe not do that, but the principle of what we're trying to learn here, there's nothing wrong with it. In fact, it's really, really cool that he was able to do that. Man, that's actually really cool how that works out. I gotta practice this thing. That's kind of a nice little finger twister there that involves parallel motion as well as contrary motion, but more contrary than parallel in a line like that, and they all kind of work. They all totally work individually. So it's really it's quite interesting to me that works. All right, so good job on that one, Bob, and it allowed us to talk a little bit about melodies in arpeggiation. So Paul, your link wasn't working before, and I don't know if you've managed to fix it, but when you do, I'll take a look at it. But I think it's that you made it a private score, I think is what happened. So we're going to talk more about, so this is now third species counterpoint. We'll talk more about that next week. We'll talk about the other ones. But I wanted to make sure we really dwelled on these basic principles of first species counterpoint for a few reasons. There's other ones too, I know, because this right now we're just looking at the comments, the people who posted as comments, but some people posted theirs as entirely separate things, and Allison just posted this other thing that an hour ago that I haven't gotten to check out yet. But I am going to take a quick look at Kevin McDonald's version here, but as I do that, I'm going to kind of wrap things up talking about a few more generalities here. The generalities here, well, first of all, just learning the mechanics of how this works, that we have a cantus firmus that we're trying to harmonize, and how to download the thing from musiccore.com and creating a free account to do that, etc. So just the mechanics of doing these exercises, and then putting yourself in that mindset where we're not writing lines thinking about chord progressions, or we're not even writing new melodies exactly. We're writing things that are melodic but harmonize with something. And this is the essence of what counterpoint is about. We're writing something that is melodic in itself but also harmonizes well with something else. And so first species counterpoint does all the practice in getting into that mindset. And it's kind of all downhill from there. By downhill, I don't mean it gets worse. I mean it gets easier, right? I hate that expression is so weird. It's like under par. Under par in golf is good, but we always use it to mean something bad. So I always feel weird about that one. But when I say it's all downhill from here, I mean it gets easier from here, because this mindset that we are dealing with here is the mindset that we need to deal with. So I'm going to look at Kevin's example here. All right, really nice. And this one reminds me a lot of the line that I wrote, in that it's got parallel motion in the same places. And in fact, it's like an interesting counterpoint to mine. If you remember, I don't remember mine because I demoed it so many times, but it had had parallel thirds here. Well, Kevin's got parallel sixths here. My version had parallel sixths here. Kevin has parallel thirds here. So this is largely the same type of contour that I was working with, except where one of them had parallel thirds, the other one has parallel sixths. And those are the parallels you're going to have. And this is the sugar. This is the sugar that you use sparingly. And I piled on that sugar in my demonstration. I ain't going to lie. That was more parallel thirds and parallel sixths than I would normally think wise if I were literally trying to write a piece of Renaissance music, but I wasn't, right? We're trying to learn about the way that counterpoint, the way that these principles work of using consonances and paying attention to the overall melodic line and trying to make it be independent enough to be interesting. So this is, to me, independent enough to be interesting. And he's got that repeated note there, which is kind of, it's neither here nor there, but it allowed him not to have an octave, which is what I had. It does mean there's a little more, this is more parallel motion than mine was. I think I had a little more contrary motion happening, but he's got the contrary motion that we need at the end, and he's got the contrary motion, well, it's really oblique motion from here to here. So, this is like all parallel motion except for that one bit of oblique motion where one voice stays on the same note, other than the end is the one place where we get contrary motion. So the thing that I will say is, if you're looking for more independence, write more contrary motion. If you're looking for something that gives you right, that type of figure where those ornamental figures are very typically Baroque, and then this totally feels that way. And right, these are the totally types of figures that you'll see Bach doing. Whoops, not like that. You'll see all sorts of passages like that in Bach fugues and so forth. 1-to-1 counterpoint, parallel thirds, parallel sixths. Works every time, but then what you got to do is just figure out how much of that you want. So, hope that this really gives everyone a good grounding, and if you haven't done yours yet, you can see what kinds of things to be looking out for as you do them. By all means, jump ahead now and start doing second and third species counterpoint. If you got the time, do fourth, but we'll talk about that more next week. So, let's see if MuseScore will play my music a little nicer. There we go. That sounds okay. So, thanks, everyone. Thanks for the wonderful conversation in the chat. Very lively and good observations that people are making. Thanks for all the submissions so far. Keep them coming, and we'll just keep talking about this. I'll post a prompt to make sure that people start thinking about working on that second and third species counterpoint, because that's what I'm going to focus on second and third next week. And then the week after that, we'll have kind of a project involving the full-on fifth species counterpoint, which is write music yourself, basically, not follow a bunch of little things. So, hope everyone has a great day, a great week, and I will see you next time. Thanks, everyone.